They called me a failure, the hobbyist, the invisible son. And for 6 years I let them. I let my father sip his bourbon and my brother Mark carve the roast as if he were carving my dignity. But tonight, Christmas Eve, the silence I had bought for $6.8 billion was about to become their weapon, not theirs. It was Christmas Eve at my parents' house in Connecticut, the kind of evening that smelled like pine needles and unspoken resentment. My brother Mark was carving the roast, my father was sipping his bourbon, and I was quietly stirring my cinnamon tea when it happened. Still pretending to be some online businessman, Mark said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. Laughter followed, sharp, familiar. Then my phone buzzed. And just like that, the room that had judged me for years went silent. It had started as a small gathering. My parents loved to host Christmas dinner in their sprawling colonial home, all precise, neutral gray walls that seemed to absorb all warmth, framed by family portraits, where every smile looked tightly measured. The massive chandelier, the imposing oak table, the same routine, Mark casually mentioning his new corner office view that overlooked my old college dorm, Dad nodding with pride, Mom trying to keep the peace while I sat there, the invisible son, who never quite made the family cut. I'd stopped trying to defend myself years ago. It wasn't worth the effort. No matter what I said about NovaQuant, my startup as they like to call it with air quotes, they'd smile politely, then ask if I'd found a real job yet. Every Christmas was a rerun. This one was supposed to be different. I'd promised myself I'd just eat, smile, survive the evening, and leave early. But Mark had a talent for provocation. "Are you still living in that little apartment in Chicago?" he asked, carving another slice of roast like he was slicing through my dignity. "What's it called again, that company of yours? Something with quant in it." "Sounds made up." Dad chuckled. "He's trying, Mark. You know how it is with these tech things. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't." "It's been 6 years," Dad Mark replied. "If it hasn't worked by now, it's not going to. At some point, you stop calling it a startup and start calling it a hobby." The words landed softly but stayed heavy. I took a slow sip of my tea, letting the warmth cut through the cold pit in my stomach. The cinnamon reminded me of my early days, sleepless nights in a one-bedroom apartment coding through exhaustion, while my co-founders crashed on air mattresses beside me. 6 years of sacrifice, of believing in something no one else could see. And still, to my family, I was just the kid who hadn't grown up. Mom shot me a sympathetic look, but quickly diverted her eyes back to her plate. "Mark, honey, maybe ease up a little." "It's Christmas," he grinned. "I'm just saying what we're all thinking. Ethan's a good guy, but come on, how long are we going to pretend this online business thing is real?" I forced a small smile. "You'll find out sooner or later." He laughed, sharp and dismissive. "Sure we will." Then the room went quiet. Not because of anything I said, but because my phone buzzed on the table, vibrating against the wood. Normally I'd have ignored it, but something on the screen caught my eye. The name flashing across it made me forget to breathe for a moment. Goldman Sachs Private Wealth Management. Mark frowned. "What's that?" "Some scam email." I picked up the phone slowly, my reflection trembling on the screen. For a second I thought it had to be a mistake. But when I answered, the voice on the other end was calm, professional, and all too real. "Ward, this is Jonathan Price, Senior Associate at Goldman Sachs Private Wealth Division. I wanted to personally congratulate you on becoming one of our top-tier clients. Your account has been officially classified under our elite private portfolio, total assets under management $6.8 billion. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the faint hum of the fireplace. Mark's knife froze mid-air. Dad set down his glass. Even Mom's polite hostess smile vanished. I could hear my own pulse louder than the man's voice on the phone. "I thank you," I managed. "That's unexpected." "It's well-deserved, sir. Your firm's acquisition was finalized this afternoon, correct? Incredible timing. The entire financial world's talking about it. Congratulations again, and Merry Christmas." "Merry Christmas," I said softly and hung up. I didn't look up right away. I just stared at the phone, the black screen reflecting the stunned faces around me. Mark's jaw clenched, his confident smirk replaced by confusion. 6 billion, he whispered. Dad was the first to speak. "Ethan, what the hell was that?" I took a slow sip of tea. "That I said was Goldman Sachs." The silence that pressed against my chest stretched so long it felt holy. The same house that once echoed with condescension now held its breath. Even the clock seemed to hesitate before ticking again. Mark opened his mouth, then closed it. For once he had no clever retort, no smug laughter, no superiority to hide behind. Just shock, and maybe deep down a flicker of shame. Mom covered her mouth with trembling fingers. That figure she repeated as if saying it would make it real. 6.8, I corrected gently. Dad stood slowly, eyes searching mine. "You mean to tell me?" I nodded. "Novaquant was acquired this afternoon. The deal went public about 2 hours ago. Goldman manages part of my portfolio now." No one spoke. Mark's fork slipped from his hand and clattered onto his plate. The sound echoed through the room like a gunshot. I glanced around the table. Same chandelier, same portraits, same roast cooling on the table, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small sitting there. I didn't feel like an outsider. I felt free. The invisible chains had snapped. Dad finally broke the silence, his voice unsteady. "Why didn't you tell us?" I smiled faintly. "Because you wouldn't have believed me." Mark exhaled, shaking his head like he was trying to wake from a bad dream. "You let me call you a failure. While you were sitting on this fortune 6.8, I repeated calm as the snow falling outside. "And yes, I let you." "Why?" he asked, almost shouting now. "Why wouldn't you say anything?" I looked at him, at the brother who'd spent years reminding me of my shortcomings, who'd made me question every inch of my worth, and said quietly, "Because sometimes silence says more than words ever could." I earned this quiet. The clock struck 8. Somewhere outside, a choir started singing carols, their voices drifting faintly through the cold December air. I set my cup down, stood and reached for my coat. I didn't hurry. My movements were slow, deliberate, savoring the stillness of the room. "Where are you going?" Mom asked, her voice still shaking. "Home," I said, buttoning the collar. Dinner was lovely. Mark stood motionless. Dad didn't move. The room stayed still, frozen in a tableau of disbelief. As I walked toward the door, the faint scent of cinnamon trailed behind me. I paused for a moment, hand on the doorknob, and glanced back at the family that had once defined me. "Merry Christmas," I said, and for the first time in 6 years, I meant it. 6 years earlier, I was sitting in a dark apartment in Chicago with an empty cup of the 3-day-old black bean soup I'd learned to portion out, and a frozen window that refused to close all the way. Outside, snow fell against the glass in lazy spirals, the kind that looked beautiful only if you weren't living under it. Inside, my laptop glowed like the last piece of hope I had left. Novaquant wasn't a company back then, it was an idea, a stubborn dream built out of sleepless nights and quiet desperation. I had left a comfortable analyst job at a hedge fund because every dollar I earned there felt like a counterfeit. I wanted to build something that mattered, something that could make finance transparent and fair. I told my father that, and he laughed. "Fairness," he'd said. "There's no fairness in money, Ethan. There's only survival." Maybe he was right. Because for the next 6 years, that's all I did survive. The first year was the easiest. Everyone's enthusiastic in the beginning. I maxed out my savings, pitched to investors, who smiled politely but never called back, and told myself every no was just a step closer to a yes. My co-founders, Jenna, a cryptography genius, and Aaron, a quiet coder from MIT, believed as fiercely as I did. We worked in a cramped apartment that doubled as an office, slept on air mattresses, and shared cold pizza like it was victory. By year 2, the enthusiasm had thinned. Our prototype failed 3 times. Aaron's girlfriend left him. Jenna started consulting part-time to pay rent. I sold my car to cover server costs. My dad stopped taking my calls. When I finally got through one evening, he said, "You're 31, Ethan. At some point, dreams stop being noble and start being irresponsible." I hung up before he could finish, but the words stuck. By year 3, we'd run out of investors, out of cash, out of patience. Nova Quant was nothing more than a handful of code and a half-broken laptop. We sat in silence one night, 3 adults in a room full of empty takeout boxes, trying to decide if it was time to quit. "Maybe it's not meant to happen," Jenna whispered. I stared at the screen at the line of code that refused to work and said no. "It will happen. We're just early." That became our joke for years. "We're just early." It made failure sound like patience. By year 4, we had a working algorithm that could predict market anomalies faster than any existing AI model. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. The problem was, no one wanted to believe a group of broke nobodies had built something that powerful. Goldman Sachs didn't return our emails. Venture capitalists called us overly idealistic. One even said, "You sound like kids trying to fix a system that doesn't want to be fixed." He wasn't wrong. We licensed small bits of code to mid-tier trading firms, barely enough to pay rent. The IRS sent letters. My health insurance lapsed. There were nights I stared at the ceiling and wondered if my father was right, if maybe failure wasn't something you fell into, but something you eventually accepted. Then, year 5 came. The year that changed everything. It started with an email from a cybersecurity researcher at MIT, a woman named Layla. She'd seen our paper on quantum-resistant encryption and wanted to collaborate. I almost deleted it, assuming it was spam. Instead, I wrote back, "We can't pay, but we can promise bad coffee and eternal gratitude." She replied, "I'll bring the coffee." Layla arrived 2 weeks later, confident, sharp, and terrifyingly smart. Within months, she'd rewritten half our codebase, rebuilt our security model, and turned Nova Quant from a fragile experiment into a fortress. She didn't just save the company, she saved us. She worked silently, most days headphones in hair, tied back eyes, fixed on the screen. But sometimes at 3 in the morning when everyone else was asleep, she'd pause and say, "This could actually work, right? Like world-changing work." I'd laugh softly. "If it does, no one will believe it started here." She smiled. That's the best kind of story. By year 6, we had a prototype that stunned everyone who saw it, an AI-driven encryption engine capable of processing real-time financial data with near-zero latency. We tested it against major systems and won every benchmark. Still, investors hesitated. Too risky, too ambitious, too impossible. Until one day, an anonymous firm reached out through encrypted channels, no less. They wanted a demo. Their email signature read simply, "GS Private Tech Division, Goldman Sachs." For a week, we lived on adrenaline and bad coffee. We presented everything: the algorithm, the predictive model, the encryption layers. The call ended with silence. Then, "We'll be in touch." They were. 2 months later, they sent an offer, a partnership proposal first, then an acquisition clause we never saw coming. It wasn't just big money. It was life-altering, generational. When the lawyers finalized the deal, the number on the screen didn't look real: $6.8 billion. I stared at it for a long time, my hands trembling. After 6 years of being told I was wasting my life, the world suddenly decided I was brilliant. It didn't feel like victory. It felt quiet, like crossing a finish line alone. We signed the papers. Layla cried. Aaron laughed. Jenna just stared at the screen and whispered, "We're not early anymore." I wanted to call my dad that night to tell him everything, to hear something other than disappointment in his voice. But I didn't. Instead, I sat by the window watching the snow fall over the city and whispered to myself, "They'll know when it matters." That was December 23rd, 2 days before Christmas dinner. The night before I left for Connecticut, Layla stopped by my office. "You're nervous," she said. I shrugged. "Have you ever tried having Christmas with people who think your worth is measured by your last W-2? She smiled. "Then don't go for them. Go for yourself. You earned the silence that's coming." I nodded, though I didn't fully grasp what she meant, until I was standing in that silent dining room 2 nights later. When I got on the train the next morning, I looked out at the snow-covered tracks stretching endlessly ahead. 6 years of failure behind me, $6 billion waiting in the future, and somewhere in between, the family that still didn't believe in me. The train shuddered forward. I closed my eyes and thought, let them talk. Soon they wouldn't have anything left to say. The train ride home felt longer than 6 years. Snow streaked past the windows like static, soft and relentless, while the world outside blurred into white and memory. I'd forgotten how empty Connecticut looked in winter, all frozen ponds and bare trees. The same landscapes that had once whispered failure back at me. I kept replaying the Goldman call in my head, their congratulatory tone so calm, it almost felt like an apology from the universe. But I knew my family wouldn't see it that way. To them, I'd always be the kid who left stability for delusion. When the train pulled into New Haven, my father's driver was waiting. Not for me, for my brother Mark, who had apparently taken the same train, but in first class. The driver's eyes widened when he saw me step off the platform. "Mr. Ward," he asked, uncertain. "Ethan," I corrected. "You don't have to really," Mr. Ward insisted, "sir. Said to bring both sons." That was new. My father never insisted on me being anywhere. The drive to my parents' house was quiet, except for the steady hum of the tires on icy pavement. Their mansion sat on a hill like it was looking down at the rest of the world. Same white columns, same glowing windows, same impossible warmth that never seemed to reach me. Mom met me at the door with a smile that looked like it had been practiced in a mirror. "Ethan, you made it. You look thin, honey." She avoided my gaze as she spoke. "I'm fine, Mom." She hugged me anyway, her perfume faintly sweet, the same scent from my childhood when I'd bury my face in her shoulder after Dad's long lectures. She pulled back and looked at me like she was checking for bruises she couldn't see. "Your father's in the study. Try not to start anything, okay? I'm not here to start anything." "You always say that," she sighed. The house hadn't changed, the same mahogany floors polished to a mirror shine, the same oil paintings of ancestors with eyes that held no kindness, the same faint smell of polished leather and expensive unopened books. I followed the sound of classical music into the study. Dad was there sitting behind his desk like a judge about to deliver a verdict he'd prepared 20 years ago. His hair had thinned since I'd last seen him, but the same steel-gray eyes lifted when he noticed me. "So," he said, leaning back, "you decided to show up this year." "It's Christmas," I said. "It was Christmas last year, too. I was busy working." He smirked. "Working. Right." The silence that pressed against my chest stretched. He set down his glass of bourbon and gestured to the chair opposite him. "Sit. Let's have this out before your mother starts crying." I sat. "There's nothing to have out." "Sure there is," he said. "Your brother tells me you're, what do you call it, Nova something." "Still going Nova Quant?" I said evenly. "And yes, it's going." He smiled the kind of smile that cut the air between us. "You know, I used to think your stubbornness was admirable. Now I think it's pathological. You could have joined Mark at Goldman. You could have been set for life. Instead, you're playing startup roulette." I looked him in the eye. "Maybe I wasn't meant to be set for life." "You're not meant to throw it away either." We sat there locked in the same battle we'd been fighting since I was 25, him arguing for security, me arguing for purpose. The difference now was that I'd already won. He just didn't know it yet. Mark walked in without knocking, fresh from a shower. Hair slicked back, the smell of expensive cologne cutting through the room. "Dad, dinner's ready," he said before noticing me. "Oh, he's here." "Nice to see you too," I said. He grinned, the same smug tilt I'd seen 1,000 times. "Still pretending to be some online businessman." I smiled faintly. Still pretending to understand what I do. His grin faded. "Cute." Dad stood, ending the moment. "Let's eat. Your mother's waiting." Dinner was exactly what I expected, the same polished silver, the perfectly roasted ham, and a table full of questions disguised as conversation. Aunt Susan wanted to know if I was still doing computers. Uncle Rick asked if I'd finally gotten investors. Every sentence carried a sting, but I'd learned long ago how to bleed quietly. Mark led the conversation, of course, talking about his new position at Goldman, the luxury apartment in Manhattan, the partnership he was certain was coming next year. Mom beamed at him like he'd personally invented success. "And what about you, Ethan?" Dad asked, finally cutting into his steak. "Still living." "Where is it, Chicago?" "Yes," I said. Mark smirked. "Still patient." I took a sip of water steady. "Just early, Mark." "Always early." He laughed. "That's one way to spin 6 years of rent payments." I let it go. I let them have their comfort one last Christmas of believing I was less. When dinner ended, I helped Mom clear the plates. She leaned close as she stacked them. "He doesn't mean it, you know. Your father, your brother, they just want to see you stable." "I know," I said softly. "But Mom's stability looks different to everyone." She smiled sadly. "I just hope yours doesn't break you." I slipped outside. The air was sharp and cold, the stars hidden behind heavy clouds. I thought about the irony of it all. 6 years of being their disappointment, their example of what not to do. And still part of me wanted my father to look at me and see more than failure. I pulled my phone from my pocket, staring at the unread message. The one confirming the Goldman Sachs acquisition, the one scheduled to hit the wire tomorrow at noon. I slipped the phone back into my coat and took a long breath of the freezing air. I felt the weight of their judgment lift from my shoulders. The snow began to fall again, soft flakes landing on my coat like tiny promises. I looked up at the dark sky and whispered to no one in particular, "Merry Christmas." This time the words didn't taste like surrender. They tasted like the weight of the coming silence. The morning of Christmas Day felt unnaturally still. Snow covered everything in a suffocating white blanket, the kind of sterile perfection this family always chased. The house was quiet except for the heavy accusatory tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I stood in the kitchen pouring coffee, listening to the sound of the liquid hitting the mug. It was strange how silence could weigh more than noise. I hadn't slept. My phone buzzed all night with emails from lawyers and congratulations from partners, but I didn't answer any of them. The deal had gone public hours ago. The press hadn't caught on yet, but they would. By midday, the entire financial world would know that NovaQuant had been acquired by Goldman Sachs for the amount of $6.8 billion. I watched steam rise from my coffee and thought about how the same number that would make headlines today had once been nothing but a joke at this very table. That figure sounded unreal, like it belonged to someone else. Maybe in a way it did. Mom walked in wearing her robe and slippers. "You're up early," she said, surprised. "I never really slept." She reached for a mug, then stopped, her eyes searching mine. "Are you all right? You seemed tense last night." "Just tired," I said, forcing a smile. She nodded slowly. "Mark's taking your father to the club later. You should join them. Maybe clear the air a bit." "I don't think that's a good idea." She sighed. "It's Christmas Day, Ethan. Can't we pretend to be normal for 2 days?" I didn't answer. She poured herself coffee, then reached over to squeeze my hand. "Whatever happens, remember you're still their son. Don't let pride ruin that." "I'm not the one with pride, Mom." She gave me a look I couldn't quite read, half love, half fear, and left the room without another word. By mid-morning, the first email alert hit my inbox. Bloomberg Goldman Sachs acquires quantum data firm in multi-billion-dollar deal. My name wasn't in the headline yet, but the article mentioned an AI fintech startup and founder Ethan Ward. It wouldn't take long for the dots to connect. The second alert came 15 minutes later. Reuters confirms NovaQuant acquisition among largest of the year. The storm had begun. I closed my laptop and stepped outside. Across the driveway, Mark was brushing snow off his BMW. "Morning, brother," he said, hanging up. "Dad says you're welcome to join us at the club. Maybe pick up a few lessons on how business really works." "I'll pass," I said. "I think I have my own meeting at noon." He frowned slightly, sensing something. "Suit yourself. Try not to ruin Mom's day while we're gone." They drove off in a blur of salt and snow. The silence that followed was deafening. I went back inside, stood in the doorway of the living room, and let the weight of everything settle. 6 years of humiliation. 6 years of quiet belief. And now, 6 billion reasons to never explain myself again. The clock struck 11. My phone buzzed again this time, with messages that felt heavier than any before. From Goldman Sachs PR office. Subject, confidential. Official acknowledgement of NovaQuant acquisition. Mr. Ward, congratulations on your firm's successful transaction. Your name will appear in official statements released at 12:00 p.m. EST. Goldman Sachs recognizes you as our newest and largest private client under the Elite Portfolio Division. Please confirm receipt. I stared at the screen. 12:00 p.m. EST. 1 hour. Mom's voice drifted from upstairs. Ethan, honey, would you mind setting the table for lunch? Sure, I said. I moved through the motions, plates, silverware, napkins, all while the seconds crawled closer to noon. My hands were steady. I wondered if Dad would still drink bourbon tonight, or if the taste of pride might be enough. At 11:58, I checked my phone one last time. No new messages, just the calm before the crash. At 11:59, the snow outside thickened, muffling every sound. At 12 o'clock, the world shifted. The phone buzzed again, then wouldn't stop. Notifications poured in like a flood. Forbes, CNBC, Wall Street Journal. Each headline louder than the last, vibrating against the polished wood table. Goldman Sachs acquires AI fintech startup NovaQuant for $6.8 billion. Founder Ethan Ward becomes one of the youngest billionaires in the industry. The sound of the front door opening snapped me back. Dad's voice boomed through the hall. Ethan, turn on the TV. Mark says something crazy's on the news. I turned it on. CNBC was running the story on a loop. The anchor's voice crisp and detached. Sources confirmed the acquisition of NovaQuant, an AI-driven fintech firm founded by Ethan Ward, previously unknown to the public. Dad stopped mid-step. Mark appeared behind him, face pale. That's you, Dad said. Mark blinked as if saying it out loud would change it. You sold to Goldman. I nodded slowly. Yesterday. The air in the room shifted sharp, fragile electric. Dad sank into the nearest chair. $6.8 billion, he murmured. He trailed off. Mark opened his mouth, but no words came out. For the first time in his life, he had nothing to say. I looked at both of them, steady and calm, the way you look at ghosts that no longer scare you. Yeah, I said quietly. I told you it would work. No one moved. No one breathed. The only sound was the clock marking every second of disbelief. Then softly, almost kindly, I added, Now you know how business really works, Dad. The snow outside fell harder, blanketing everything in silence. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like an intruder in my own home. I felt like the storm had just broken. The house was quiet, the silence that pressed against my chest now sharp and brittle, as if the sound of the TV had shattered the family's core illusion. No one spoke after the news broke. Dad sat slumped in his chair, staring blankly at the TV as the CNBC anchor repeated my name again and again. Mark stood near the window, his reflection fractured against the snow outside. His phone was in his hand, but his thumb didn't move. For a man who always had something to say, the quiet looked foreign on him. Mom was the first to break the spell. That figure, she whispered almost reverently. Ethan, is it true? Yes. She covered her mouth. My God. Mark turned slowly. His face had drained of color, his expression twisting between disbelief and something uglier. You let me humiliate you last night, he said. You didn't need my permission, I replied evenly. He took a step toward me. You sat there, you let me. His voice cracked. You let me call you a failure. I didn't move. You told me what you needed to believe. His gaze held mine, wordless. You think this makes you better than me? No, I said quietly. It just means I stopped needing to prove I wasn't worse. Dad finally looked up, his eyes glassy. Why didn't you tell us? Would you have listened? His silence was the only reply. Mark's laugh was a single harsh expulsion of air, sounding more like a cough. $6 billion. Jesus Christ, Ethan. You, of all people. He rubbed his face, pacing the room. This is insane. You don't even play golf. You wear the same damn jacket every year. How the hell did you pull this off? By working, I said. He stopped pacing. No. People don't just work and wake up billionaires. Who helped you? Whose money did you use? Mine, I said simply. Mark stared at me, then shook his head. No. No, you're lying. This is some publicity stunt. The phone in Dad's hand buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his expression tightening. It's your firm, he said to Mark. Goldman. Mark snatched the phone, pressed it to his ear. Yeah. Whatever he heard made his posture collapse. He went pale, his hand trembling as he lowered the phone. They're saying you're the acquisition, Ethan. That you're the reason we've been working on the merger for months. My own department, his voice broke. You were the deal. I nodded once. Mark laughed, covering his mouth as if to hide the sound of his own defeat. Unbelievable. The whole time I thought I was a success story. You are, I said softly. Just not the only one. He glared at me. You humiliated me. I met his eyes. Welcome to the club. For a long moment, a profound silence hung between us. Then Dad stood, his hand raised like he could stop time. Enough. Mark turned to him. You're really taking his side. I'm not taking sides, Dad said quietly. I'm just trying to understand how my sons became enemies. I looked at him, tired. You trained us to be. That landed harder than I expected. Dad's face tightened, and for the first time in my life he looked smaller. I wanted you to be strong, he said. You wanted control, I corrected. Strength doesn't come from humiliation, Dad. It comes from getting up after it. No one spoke after that. The fire crackled softly, the only sound in the room. Mom wiped her eyes. Maybe it's time we all stop trying to win. But Mark couldn't stop. You think you're some hero now, huh? You built a company, great. Congratulations. But you'll never have what I have. I tilted my head. And what's that? He hesitated. A lifetime membership at the club your father belongs to. I almost felt sorry for him. You mistake fear for respect, Mark. It's a common error. His jaw clenched. He opened his mouth to fire back, but the TV interrupted. The anchor's voice was bright and merciless. In an unexpected twist, sources confirmed that the founder of NovaQuant, Ethan Ward, is now Goldman Sachs' largest private client. His personal net worth exceeds the acquisition figure, making him one of the youngest billionaires in America. The acquisition is expected to redefine the future of AI-driven finance. The words hung in the air like thunder. Mark turned off the TV, the click echoing through the room. You really planned this, he said, his voice trembling. You waited until Christmas. You wanted to humiliate us. I wanted to have dinner with my family, I said. The rest just happened. Dad stared at the floor. You could have told me, son. I could have, I said. But every time I tried, you told me to grow up. The silence that followed was final, heavy with 6 years of everything we'd never said. Mom moved first, reaching for my hand. Her eyes were wet with relief, not tears of pride. I knew you were strong enough, she whispered. I wasn't, I said softly. Not until now. Mark looked at her, disbelief flickering across his face. You're actually proud of him, she turned to him, calm and gentle. He earned it, Mark. Every inch of it. He shook his head, unable to process it, and stormed out. The sound of the front door slamming echoed like a closing chapter. Dad watched him go, then looked at me, his voice barely a whisper. What happens now? I don't know, I said. Maybe nothing. Maybe that's the point. He nodded slowly. You were right about one thing. What's that? Silence, he said. It really does say more than words. I glanced out the window. Snow still fell soft and endless, blanketing the world in quiet white. For once I didn't feel like the failure in the room. I felt like the storm had passed, and all that remained was the silence, clean unbroken, and finally mine. The next morning, the sun rose over a world that suddenly knew my name. The quiet Connecticut snow glowed gold under the light, but inside the house, the air still hung heavy, too thick for warmth. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Calls, texts, emails, all from numbers I didn't recognize. Journalists, bankers, old classmates, even relatives who hadn't spoken to me in years, all suddenly remembered I existed. I didn't answer a single one. Mom knocked softly on my door. "Ethan, there's someone downstairs for you." I frowned. "Who?" "She said she used to work with you." I opened the door, still half in disbelief. Layla Mom smiled faintly. "That's her name." Downstairs, Layla stood in the foyer snow, still clinging to her coat. She looked different, not tired, not frantic like she had during our startup days, but composed, radiant even. When she saw me, she smiled a genuine private smile. "You're impossible to reach now," she said, stepping forward. "I had to drive here." I chuckled. "You could have texted." I did, 10 times. We both laughed, awkward and real. Mom, sensing something beyond her comprehension, excused herself. "I'll give you 2 a minute." When she was gone, Layla exhaled. "So the amount came through, huh? Give or take a few decimals," I said. "Do you ever plan to act surprised?" "I've had practice pretending." She looked around the house. "Is this where it happened? The speech, the humiliation, the whole thing?" I nodded. "Right there," I said, pointing at the dining room. Same table, same crowd, different silence. Layla's gaze lingered on me. "And now it's over." "No, Ethan," she said softly. "Now it begins." I poured her a cup of tea. Cinnamon, of course. She smiled when she saw it. "You and your tea. Even when you were broke, you always had that smell in the office. I used to think you drank it because it was cheap." "It was," I said. "But I liked how it filled the room. Made things feel calmer." She took a sip, her eyes softening. "So what are you going to do with it all?" "The money, the power," she said. I leaned back, thinking, everyone keeps asking me that, as if money means I have to do something with it. Maybe I just want to breathe for a while. Layla smiled faintly. "You earned that." Before I could answer, footsteps echoed from the hallway. Mark. He looked rough, sleepless eyes, undone tie the weight of something too heavy for his perfect posture. He froze when he saw her. "You brought company." Layla stood politely. "I was just leaving." Mark waved a hand. "Don't. Stay. I want witnesses." I sighed. "To what?" "To this," he said, holding up his phone. "Every news outlet, every finance board, every firm in New York is talking about you." "You think this is victory, Ethan? It's not. It's an audit on your entire life, and I know your books aren't clean." I met his stare, calm. "You sound worried." "I am," he snapped. "Because you don't understand what you've done. You've made me a joke at Goldman. The guy who mocked his billionaire brother on Christmas. Do you know how that looks?" "Yes," I said quietly. "It looks like a distraction from your own performance report." His jaw tightened. "You always think in fairy tales, good and evil, right and wrong. But this is Wall Street. It's blood and numbers. You're not one of them, Ethan. You're prey pretending to be a predator." I stood slowly. "Maybe. But I've already survived being hunted by my own family. That's more than most predators can say." For a moment, a tense silence filled the room. Layla broke it first. "Mark, he didn't do this to you." "You did." Mark turned to her, incredulous. "Oh, so now you're defending him too." "Of course you are. The golden co-founder, right? You helped build the empire." She didn't flinch. "I helped him build something that worked. The rest is what people made of it." He laughed bitterly. "Spare me the philosophy. You two think you're better than the rest of us because you believed in something. You're not. You're just lucky." "Maybe," I said. "But luck doesn't stay quiet for 6 years. Luck doesn't build code in basements or take meetings no one shows up for. Luck doesn't survive rejection. I did." His mouth opened, then closed again. For once there was nothing left to argue. Mark looked at me one last time, eyes full of something between envy and surrender. "The silence will break, brother," he said finally. "They always do." When he was gone, Layla whispered, "That was brutal." I sat down slowly. "He's not wrong. It doesn't feel warm, just quiet." Layla's expression softened. "You wanted them to see you. Now they do." Does it feel like victory? I thought about it. The money, the headlines, the power that everyone seemed to think mattered so much. It didn't feel like triumph. It felt like an ending, and endings were never as loud as people imagined. I think I said, finally victory is just the noise before the next silence. Layla smiled sadly. Then what comes next? I looked out the window. Snow was still falling soft and endless. Maybe something better, I said. Something that doesn't need to prove itself. She nodded. Then you already know what to do. What's that? Make it mean something. Her phone buzzed. She glanced down, then back up. I have to go. They want interviews, statements, features. They're already turning you into a myth. Then tell them the truth, I said. And what's that? That I was never chasing revenge? I said. I was chasing peace. Layla smiled, eyes glinting in the winter light. You found it, almost. When she left the house, felt even quieter than before. I walked to the window and watched her car disappear into the snow, a trail of tire marks fading behind her. In the distance, church bells rang faint, distant, almost like memory. I thought of all the years I'd spent trying to earn approval, the arguments, the failures, the long nights that no one would ever see. I thought of the little apartment, the broken laptop, the smell of cinnamon. And standing there in the silence of a house that had once suffocated me, I realized something I hadn't before. I had won. But winning wasn't the reward. Peace was. And peace, I learned that morning, was the most expensive thing I'd ever bought, and the only thing worth keeping. By the time I woke up the next morning, my name was everywhere. The world had officially decided I mattered. The first thing I saw was a headline glowing on my phone screen. Goldman Sachs' new billionaire partner, the quiet genius who outsmarted Wall Street. The second was a swarm of missed calls. CNBC, Bloomberg, TechCrunch, even the New York Times. I set the phone down without answering. The house was still, but outside the world had lost its mind. Reporters were camped by the gate. I heard the faint but relentless click of telephoto lenses from the woods. A van with a news logo idled at the end of the long road, waiting for someone to step outside. Mom peeked into the room, whispering like we were fugitives. They've been here since 6 a.m. They want to talk to you. Who? All of them, she said. Reporters, photographers, even a radio host. I told them you were sleeping. I smiled faintly. That's the first time I've ever been worth waking up for. She looked at me with that same conflicted pride she'd worn since yesterday. Ethan, it's getting out of hand. You need to say something. Set the record straight. I picked up my phone again. The record's fine, Mom. Let them talk. But the truth was, I didn't want to talk. Not yet. By noon, the driveway was filled with camera flashes and the muffled chaos of voices yelling my name. Dad stood by the front door, watching it all like he was seeing a foreign world invade his. You could have warned us, he said. About success, I asked quietly. His gaze held mine wordless. Instead, he straightened his tie, a nervous habit he'd never admit to. They're calling us too. Reporters, clients. Everyone wants to know what kind of father raises a billionaire. I glanced at him. Tell them the truth. And what's that? That you raised 2 sons who turned out exactly like you, one chasing money, the other running from it. For a second, he almost smiled. You sound like your mother. The irony was thick enough to choke on. Before either of us could say more, my phone buzzed again, a call I couldn't ignore this time. Goldman Sachs, Private Client Relations. I answered. Ethan Ward. A composed female voice came through. Mr. Ward, this is Anne from the executive office. Congratulations again. We'd like to formally welcome you to the Elite Portfolio Program. Goldman Sachs would also like to arrange a joint interview this evening, a feature on the acquisition and your journey. Joint interview, I repeated. Yes, with your brother Mark Ward. I almost laughed. You're kidding. She didn't. The firm believes a united image would reflect positively on both sides. Family, legacy, the human side of finance. I looked out the window at the reporters swarming my parents' lawn. Sure, I said finally. Set it up. Wonderful, she replied. CNN has already expressed interest. 6 o'clock, their Manhattan studio. A car will pick you up. I hung up and turned to Dad. Looks like I'm going on TV tonight. With Mark, I nodded. He frowned. This won't end well. It's not supposed to, I said. It's supposed to end. At 5:30, a black sedan pulled into the driveway. I stepped out of the house dressed in the same navy suit I'd worn to Christmas dinner, the one Mark had mocked. The cameras flared voices shouting questions into the freezing air. Ethan, how does it feel? Is it true? You turned down Google first? Are you the richest self-made man in America right now? I said nothing. Silence has always been my sharpest weapon. The driver opened the door. Inside, Mark was already there. His tie was perfect, his expression neutral, the professional mask he'd worn his entire life. He didn't look at me as I slid into the seat. Long day, I asked. He gave a short, humorless laugh. You have no idea. My office turned into a circus. Calls from every department head, PR, compliance, everyone wants to know how I let this happen. You didn't let anything happen, I said. You just didn't see it coming. He looked out the window. No one did. The drive to the studio was long and silent, except for the sound of the city bleeding through the glass sirens' car horns' life. When we arrived, CNN staff swarmed us, adjusting microphones, straightening jackets, running through questions we both already knew. The anchor smiled as the cameras rolled. We're joined tonight by Ethan Ward, founder of NovaQuant, recently acquired by Goldman Sachs in one of the largest private tech deals in history. And with him, his brother Mark Ward, a managing director at Goldman. Gentlemen, thank you for being here. Mark's smile was perfect controlled. Glad to represent the firm, thank you. Ethan, the anchor said. How does it feel to go from underdog to billionaire overnight? I looked at the camera, not at the audience, not at her, but directly through the lens where I imagined every face that had ever looked down on me was now watching. It doesn't feel overnight, I said. It feels like 6 years of nights no one saw. The anchor nodded, leaning forward. And how does it feel to share this moment with your brother who's also part of the Goldman Sachs family? Mark answered before I could. It's an honor, he said smoothly. I've always believed in Ethan's vision. I glanced at him just long enough for the camera to catch it. Not anger, not bitterness, just truth. Belief is easier after the headlines, I said. There was a flicker in his expression, but he recovered fast. Family's complicated, he said. So is success, I replied. The anchor smiled nervously, shifting to safer ground. Ethan, what's next for you? More startups, investments. I don't know, I said. Maybe I'll take some time to figure out what winning's supposed to feel like. The interview ended with polite smiles and handshakes. When Mark shook the anchor's hand, I saw his jaw twitch just once, a subtle breakdown of the mask. In the car ride back, he finally spoke. You made me look small. I stared out at the window. I didn't make you anything, Mark. You built that yourself. He turned away. Enjoy your victory. It's lonely up there. I've been alone a long time, I said quietly. When the car stopped in front of my hotel, I stepped out and watched it drive away. Snow was falling again, soft under the city lights, muting everything. I walked inside past the lobby filled with people pretending not to stare past the bar, where a TV played the replay of our interview. The caption read, "The Brothers Who Shook Wall Street." But I knew better. Only one of us had really been shaken, and it wasn't me. I didn't go home that night. The hotel suite Goldman had booked for me overlooked Central Park, all glass and stillness and money. The air conditioning was so quiet, I could hear the blood rush in my own ears. The silence that pressed against my chest was thick padded by the hum of elevators and the distant thrum of sirens below. The interview replayed on every channel. My face, my voice, my name. For the first time in my life, people were listening, and I wasn't sure I liked the sound of it. I had told myself success would taste like freedom. Instead, it tasted like wet cardboard, something stale and empty. My phone buzzed again, hundreds of messages, missed calls, emails. A stranger's voice on voicemail after voicemail. Ethan, I'm from the Wall Street Journal, from CNBC, from Forbes. The world was suddenly desperate to understand the man they'd ignored for 6 years. But the one name I wanted to see wasn't there. It was nearly 2 in the morning when the first call came from a number I didn't recognize but couldn't ignore. "Ethan, it's Sarah from Nova Quant." Her voice was steady, controlled. "We've been fielding calls all day. Investors, media regulators. They want statements from you. Tell them to call Goldman," I said. "I did. Goldman says to call you." I sighed. "Typical. Ethan," she said softly, "you can't disappear. You're the face of this now, whether you like it or not." I stared out at the city, its lights stretching endlessly. They don't want my face. They want a symbol. The failed son who turned into a billionaire. The revenge fantasy they can sell in headlines. "Then give them something else," she replied. "The truth." "Truth doesn't trend," I said. "Nor does peace," she replied. After the call, I sat by the window until dawn. By morning, the headlines had shifted. The billionaire who outsmarted Wall Street. From failure to fintech phenomenon. The man who embarrassed Goldman's own. I turned off the TV and went downstairs for coffee. I didn't make it past the lobby. People stopped mid-step. Some whispered. A few smiled like they recognized me from somewhere that mattered. One man in a tailored coat approached. "Mr. Ward," he said, extending a hand. "Hell of a story. You showed them." I shook his hand automatically. "Showed who?" He grinned. "Everyone who said it couldn't be done." When he left, the emptiness in my chest grew heavier. I realized my silence had only made room for his projection. Outside, reporters still hovered near the revolving doors. The noise of the street was suddenly overwhelming, a torrent of questions I refused to drown in. By the time I reached the car waiting at the corner, I felt hollowed out. I looked out the window. "Just tired," I murmured, "of being seen." The city blurred by. My phone buzzed again. This time, the name froze me. Mom. I answered immediately. "Ethan," her voice was soft, shaking. "You look so calm. Like your father used to look when he closed a deal. I'm tired. Then come home. We'll make dinner. No cameras, no noise. I don't think Dad's ready for that." A pause. "Your father's never ready for anything that makes him feel small. But he's proud of you. He won't say it, but I see it. Don't let anger steal the peace you earned." Her words hit harder than I expected. "Okay, Mom. I'll come by tomorrow." I leaned back in the seat. The world had finally seen me, but they only saw the number, not the man. And that was the cost of being seen. I walked back to the window. Snow was falling again, slow, steady, beautiful. I whispered into the glass, "Let them look." I was invisible long enough. Then I turned away and waited for morning to come, hoping to find a quiet I could truly own. The train back to Connecticut felt different this time. No tension, no weight in my chest, no fear of walking into a house that saw me as a failure. Just quiet. The kind that follows a storm when the world hasn't yet decided if it's safe again. I had to stop myself from slouching, a habit I hadn't realized I'd developed to make myself smaller in this house. I hadn't told them I was coming. Mom's call from the day before lingered in my head, her voice fragile but hopeful, asking me to come home for dinner. No cameras, no noise. I owed her that much. When the train pulled into the station, I stepped out into the cold, the kind that carried the smell of pine and the faint echo of Christmas that still hung in the air. The sky was bruised gray. The snow had started melting, leaving patches of earth exposed like scars under white. I rented a car this time, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to drive myself. No chauffeur, no headlines, no one watching, just me. The road wound through the same sleepy town I'd left behind a decade ago. The bakery on the corner was still there, the one that used to sell cinnamon rolls that tasted like December. The old diner still had the same flickering sign. The same houses, the same quiet. But everything looked smaller. When I reached the house, I parked halfway up the drive and sat there for a minute, the engine idling. The place looked exactly the same, but the energy had shifted. The Christmas lights still hung along the roof, faintly glowing in the dusk. The front door was cracked open, warmth spilling out like a welcome. Mom was the first to see me. She stepped out onto the porch, her hands tucked in her sweater sleeves. "You came," she said, smiling, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. "I said I would." "You look thinner," she said, then laughed softly. "You always looked thinner." I smiled. "Still working on fixing that." She reached for me, pulling me into a hug that was softer, longer than any we'd had before. "Your father's in the den," she said. "He's different. Different how you'll see." The house was warm. It smelled like cinnamon and pine and something cooking in the oven. The sound of soft jazz drifted from the living room. Dad was sitting by the fireplace, not with his usual bourbon, but with a cup of tea. Cinnamon. I almost laughed. I realized it wasn't just tea, it was a surrender to everything he'd mocked. He looked up when I entered. For a long moment his gaze lingered on me. Then he set the cup down and said, "You found the good kind." "Had to," I said. "It's been a long time coming." He nodded slowly, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Sit." I did. "I watched your interview," he said after a pause. "Twice. I figured. You handled yourself well." "That's new," I said. He almost smiled. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said. About control. About strength." He took a deep breath. "You were right." The words didn't sound rehearsed. They sounded heavy, like they'd cost him something to say. "I wanted to shape you into something safe," he continued. "Something predictable. I thought that was love. But it wasn't. It was fear." I noticed his hands veined and shaking slightly, resting on the armrests, the hands that once signed every contract and now seemed uncertain of where to go. "I'm not good at apologies," he said quietly, "but I am sorry. For years I made you feel small." I let the silence hold for a moment before I answered. "I stopped feeling small the moment I stopped trying to fit in here." He nodded slowly. "I can see that now." Mom entered, then carrying a tray of food: roast chicken, mashed potatoes. Gravy, all simple and warm. The same dinner she'd made every Christmas Eve when we were kids. "Dinner's ready," she said softly. As we ate, there was no talk of money, no mentions of Goldman Sachs or success or headlines. Just small things, ordinary things. The neighbor's new dog, the church's broken heater, how the grocery store still sold the wrong brand of tea. Halfway through the meal, Dad said quietly, "Your brother called." I froze. "Mark, he's in the city, taking some time off work." He didn't say much, but he paused, choosing his words carefully. "He asked how you were." I blinked, unsure if I'd heard him right. He asked. Dad nodded. "He's been thinking about a lot of things." Mom smiled faintly. "He misses you, Ethan. He just doesn't know how to say it yet." I stared at the table, the candlelight flickering across my hands. "He's had time to think," I said. "He's had time to hurt," Mom said softly. "So have you." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was full, like something healing quietly between us. After dinner, I stepped outside again. The night air was cold, clean still. I stood on the porch where everything had started, the same porch where I'd once promised myself I'd never come back. The stars were out now, faint but real. I thought about Mark somewhere in the city, probably watching the same sky, trying to make sense of the same silence. Mom came up behind me. "You should talk to him," she said gently. "I will," I said. Tonight, she added, her voice soft but firm. "Before the world gets loud again." I took out my phone and stared at the screen. His number was still saved, though I hadn't used it in years. My thumb hovered over the call button. When he answered, his voice was tired. "Ethan, Mark." A silence passed between us for several seconds. "I saw the news," he said finally. "About Mom and Dad's place. Reporters again. They're gone now." "Good," he said quietly. "They don't belong there." There was another pause. Then softer. "I'm sorry. For what? For everything. For what I said. For trying to make you small." The words hung there, fragile and real. "I know," I said. "We were both chasing the wrong thing." He laughed weakly. "I keep replaying that dinner. The things I said. I thought success made me strong. But it just made me scared." "I know that feeling too," I said. He exhaled. "Maybe we can try again. Start over." "Maybe," I said. But not as competitors this time. No, he agreed. As brothers. We didn't say goodbye. We didn't need to. The silence between us had changed. It wasn't a wall anymore. It was a bridge. When I hung up, the cold bit at my skin, but I didn't move. I looked up at the sky again, the snow beginning to fall, soft, silent, unhurried. For the first time, it didn't feel like the world was judging me. It felt like it was breathing with me. Behind me, the house glowed warm and steady. The house that built me. The house that broke me. And finally, the house that forgave me. The following week moved like fog, slow gray quiet. The noise of the media storm had dulled to a distant hum. The world had found a new obsession, as it always did. But the echo of my story still lingered in boardrooms and headlines, the family feud that shook Wall Street. I stopped checking. I didn't need to. I knew what they were saying. Mark hadn't called again since that night. Neither had Dad. Mom texted once every morning the same words, "Thinking of you. Come by soon." I didn't reply, not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know how to step back into normal. I wasn't sure normal existed anymore. Then one evening, as the city lights blurred beneath my hotel window, my phone buzzed with a message from a number I didn't recognize. Dinner Park Avenue, 7 p.m. Don't make me wait. It was signed simply M. I stared at it for a moment, half smiling. My brother never changed. The restaurant was one of those places that didn't need a name, the kind of place where every conversation was a whisper that felt like a shout. The air smelled faintly of old money and new ambition. When I arrived, Mark was already there, suit crisp, drink in hand, his reflection flickering in the glass behind him. He stood when he saw me, his smile unsure. "You came. You ordered the most expensive place in Manhattan." "I was curious," I said. He laughed softly, gesturing to the seat across from him. "You look different." "So do you?" I said, sitting down. "Tired." He nodded. "Yeah, I've had better weeks." A waiter appeared, all smooth professionalism. "Would you like to order, gentlemen? 2 scotches," Mark said. "Neat," I raised an eyebrow. "Still drinking through your problems," he smirked. "Still pretending you don't, touché." When the drinks came, we sat in silence that pressed against my chest for a moment, the air thick with everything we hadn't said in years. Mark finally broke it. "Goldman's still cleaning up after the deal. The board's furious. They say it looks like favoritism." "It wasn't," I said. "I know, but it doesn't matter what's true. It matters what people think is true, and right now they think I helped you." "You didn't." He looked up sharply. "Don't remind me. I studied with him. You didn't call me here to talk about PR." He sighed, swirling his drink. "No. I called because I wanted to say thank you. That caught me off guard." "For what?" "For not destroying me when you could have." I frowned. "I wasn't trying to destroy you." He met my eyes. "Yeah, but you could have. And that's what's been eating me alive. You didn't even need revenge. You just existed, and it did the job." I leaned back quiet. There was nothing to say to that. He continued, voice low. "You know what the worst part is? Watching you do everything I couldn't. You built something from nothing. I built something from someone else's foundation. I thought I was winning because I had the bigger title, the better suit, the nicer apartment. But you built an empire that doesn't need to prove itself." "That wasn't what I was trying to do," I said. "I know," he said. "That's what makes it worse." He looked down at his glass, his voice cracking slightly. "I've been jealous of you my whole life. Even before the money. You had something I didn't believe. I have been chasing that next title, trying to win that chess game since I was 10. I swallowed. "So was I." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, but you stopped." "I never did." For the first time, I saw him as the boy I grew up with. The boy who used to sneak into my room at night to talk about his fears before Dad's big meetings. The boy who wanted to be seen just once as enough. "I didn't want to take anything from you," I said quietly. "I just wanted to stop apologizing for who I was." He exhaled, leaning back. "You don't have to apologize anymore. Hell, maybe I'm the one who should start." I smiled faintly. "Maybe we both should." He chuckled. "So what now? You've got more money than you can spend in 10 lifetimes." What's next? Another company, a foundation, a yacht. I don't know, I said. Maybe something simpler. Something that feels real. He nodded, looking thoughtful. You know, Dad's retiring. The firm's hosting a dinner next month. You should come. I raised an eyebrow. You really think he wants me there? He didn't say it. But he didn't have to. I considered it. If I show up, the press will make it about me again. Then let them, he said. Maybe that's not such a bad thing anymore. We both laughed quietly, the kind of laugh that didn't hide pain but softened it. When dinner ended, we stepped outside into the cold. The city was alive around us, honking cabs, flashing lights, people rushing past like the world couldn't afford to slow down. Mark dug the heels of his hands into his coat pockets, looking down at the pavement. You know, I always thought success was about arriving somewhere. Now I think it's just about not being lost. I smiled. Maybe it's both. A flash of honesty crossed his face, lifting the tension from his features. You know what's funny? I used to call you a failure. But now I think you were just unfinished. I still am, I said. We both are. He nodded. Good. Means there's still time to figure out what comes next. We stood there for a while, not speaking. Just two brothers who'd spent years tearing each other down, finally learning how to stand side by side. When we finally parted ways, Mark clasped my shoulder. Hey, he said, his voice steady again. If you ever get tired of playing the quiet genius, come visit me at the firm. I'll find you an office. I smirked. And ruin your reputation again, he grinned. Wouldn't be the first time. As he walked away, I watched him disappear into the crowd, still polished, still proud, but different somehow. Lighter. The wind bit at my face as I turned toward my car. Somewhere behind me, a vendor was selling roasted chestnuts, their smell sweet and nostalgic. The city buzzed indifferent and infinite. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was running from something or toward it. I was just walking quietly, freely, finally at peace with where I was. Maybe forgiveness wasn't a moment. Maybe it was a direction. And that night, for the first time since this all began, I realized I was finally heading home. A month later, the headlines were gone. The world had already moved on to the next billionaire, the next scandal, the next name to dissect. What had once felt like a roar was now a whisper buried under 1,000 newer stories. For the first time in years, I wasn't being watched. I woke up that morning to sunlight spilling through the curtains of my apartment overlooking the river. It wasn't the penthouse Goldman had offered to secure for me, nor the glass fortress in Manhattan some publicists thought I should live in. It was simple high ceilings, wood floors, the faint hum of the city below. Home, but finally, one of my choosing. The air smelled like coffee and cinnamon. I realized some habits were worth keeping. I sat on the balcony watching the water move lazily beneath the winter sun. There was something poetic about it, how the world kept moving no matter who won or lost. How it didn't care about power or legacy, just the steady, indifferent pull of the tide. My phone buzzed once. A message from Mom. Dinner at 7. Your father's grilling. Don't be late. I smiled. I'd never thought I'd see the words your father and grilling in the same sentence. He'd retired 3 weeks ago quietly and gracefully, just as he'd built his career. The firm had thrown a dinner in his honor, a subdued affair of speeches and cigars. I'd gone standing in the back until he called me forward to shake my hand in front of everyone. No long speeches, no grand apologies, just a look. One that said everything words couldn't. Mark had been there too, standing a little apart but watching. When our eyes met, he lifted his glass in a silent toast. I returned it. It was enough. Now, a month later, the world had stopped seeing us as rivals. We were just two brothers again, complicated, scarred, but whole. At noon, I went for a walk along the waterfront. The air was cold but clean, the kind that clears your head. A few people recognized me, but no one stopped me. Fame had faded into familiarity. A woman jogged past with a dog, earbuds in. A group of college kids laughed over coffee. Somewhere nearby, a street musician played an off-key version of What a Wonderful World. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. At the cafe on the corner, I ordered black coffee and sat near the window. A man at the next table leaned over. "You're Ethan Ward." "Right?" I braced myself, but he just smiled. "My son's studying computer science. Says you're the reason he didn't quit." I blinked. "Really?" He nodded. Said if you could stick with it for 6 years without giving up, maybe he could last one more semester. I didn't know what to say. "Tell him I said thank you." The man smiled and left. I sat there for a while, staring at my reflection in the glass, at the man everyone had once called a failure. When I finished my coffee, I headed home to pack. Mom's dinner wasn't just dinner. It was the first family gathering since everything had changed, and the first without the tension that used to poison every word. The drive to Connecticut was easy. The snow had melted, leaving behind muddy streaks of brown and gold. The world looked like it was exhaling. When I pulled up to the house, laughter drifted from the backyard. Not forced, not polite. Real. Mom was setting the table under the oak tree. Her hair pulled back, cheeks flushed from the cold. Dad stood by the grill wearing an apron that said, "Kiss the cook" tongs in one hand, a beer in the other. It was so absurdly normal I almost laughed. Mark was there too, tossing a football with 2 neighborhood kids. When he saw me, he grinned and threw it my way. I caught it barely. "Still got it," he said, smirking. "Barely," I said. Mom called out, "Dinner's ready, boys." We sat around the table as the sun dipped low, turning the sky the color of embers. The food wasn't fancy, just grilled chicken, baked potatoes, roasted corn. But it tasted like something we hadn't had in years. Peace. Dad raised his glass. "To my family," he said simply. "To second chances," Mom added. "To fewer interviews." Mark said, and we all laughed. I lifted my glass last. "To the quiet," I said, "and to the people who make it worth breaking." We ate, we talked. We argued lightly about nothing, politics, sports, the best kind of pie. No one brought up money. No one mentioned Goldman Sachs or Forbes or billionaires. For once, we were just people again. After dinner, as twilight settled in, I walked to the edge of the yard. The pond beyond the fence was still half frozen, reflecting the last streaks of sunlight. The air smelled like wood smoke and earth. Mark joined me, hands in his pockets. "Do you ever think about what's next?" he asked. "Sometimes," I said, "but not too much. The silence is enough for now." He nodded. "I got an offer yesterday. From a smaller firm. Less money, more purpose. That sounds like progress." He smiled faintly. "You're rubbing off on me." A dangerous habit, I admitted. We stood there for a while, the silence comfortable. Then he said, "You know, I used to think your revenge was getting rich, but I think it was something else. What's that, outgrowing the need for revenge?" I smiled. "Maybe. Or maybe it was realizing I never needed to prove anything." He nodded, then looked back toward the house. "Mom's crying again. She does that when she's happy." "Or when she's had wine," he said, grinning. We headed back together, the house glowing softly behind the trees. Later, as I drove back to the city, the sky opened up. Not with snow this time, but rain light, steady cleansing. I rolled down the window and let it hit my hand, cool and alive. I thought about how strange it was how the same people who once broke you could become the reason you healed. How sometimes victory wasn't the headline, the wealth, or the moment everyone clapped. Sometimes it was just being able to go home again. When I reached the city, the streets glistened under the rain. I parked, climbed the stairs, and opened my apartment window. The sound of the water against the pavement filled the room like a lullaby. For the first time in years, I felt no weight. No proof, no running, just stillness. The world outside was wide and endless. But inside, it was finally quiet. And in that quiet, I realized something simple, something I had spent 6 long years chasing without knowing it. Peace wasn't found in victory. It was found in being able to let go of the fight. I leaned back in my chair, the rain still falling, and whispered to no one, "I'm finally home." Then I closed my eyes and listened, not for applause, not for voices, but for the sound of life moving on softly, beautifully, exactly as it should.